Welcome to a brief lecture on the origins of Daoist religion. We start with the biography of Lao Tzu by Ge Hong. Ge Hong was a pretty incredible figure in the Jin dynasty, so right around 300 in the current era. Actually, the next video is all about Ge Hong. In this work, he saw himself as setting the record straight on the factual elements of Lao Tzu's life. But it's clearly a very strange telling, right? There are parts of it that are not only impossible, given the time that Lao Tzu could have existed and the impact that he had, but I mean, there are clearly several supernatural facts, supernatural inclusions in this work. So it's a very interesting essay because it's the compilation of all of the different factoids, all of the different mentions of Lao Tzu in all of the texts, the historical texts, the medical texts, the apocryphal texts, which just means texts outside of the, established tradition. Ge Hong sought to bring all these together and put them into one place. The themes of this work are, the attainment of immortality, the periodic return of Lao Tzu to realize Tao in the world, right? So Lao Tzu is described as both a celestial immortal, so someone who isn't tethered to a body on this earth, but he returns to earth, assumes a body to realize the Tao at different times and in different places. It also advocates a return to simplicity, which, as you'll see, is also a theme of the Tao Te Ching, whose authorship is typically ascribed to Lao Tzu, and that is the return to simplicity. So as opposed to opulence, a lavish lifestyle, and as opposed to making a name for yourself and notoriety, Lao Tzu was a proponent of, those sorts of things, seeking that sort of recognition, that sort of, achievement distracts you from Tao as it's working, distracts you from your most natural expression of yourself, your most authentic expression of yourself. The biography of Lao Tzu also retells the story of the transmission of the Tao Te Ching, how Lao Tzu was traveling, he was leaving the realm, he'd had enough, right? And the guardian at the pass has him write it down, and then according to the biography of Lao Tzu, he then goes on to India and becomes the Buddha, right? And along the way, he steals some of Confucius's disciples and convinces Confucius that he's wrong about some things. It's really an incredible work. And the reason that I assigned it for this module, this Introduction to Daoist Religion, is that Lao Tzu is at the very center of the development of Daoist religion. So Daoist religious texts through the centuries often even have Lao Tzu in them, as Lao Tzu answering their questions, as of Lao Tzu as the cosmic Tao itself, right? Lao Tzu is the personification of Tao. And so having reference to this biography, which Ge Hong compiled again with everything available to him, gives us a sense of all the different stories surrounding this character, right? As I mentioned before, this avatar, this larger-than-life person who was Lao Tzu. Notice here also he's described as having very unique ears, right? So the biography describes him as having 3 ear holes each. And in most paintings, such as this one, he's rendered as having very large ears because, metaphorically speaking, he can hear everything in the cosmos that's happening. Next, we'll talk about the Tao Te Ching, the work that Lao Tzu purportedly authored, but likely did not, right? The text prior to probably about the 1st century CE was just referred to as the Lao Tzu, but we know it today as the Tao Te Ching. In the works that you read, it's sometimes referred to as the Classic of the Way and Its Power, translated into English. In this course, we'll just stick with the Tao Te Ching. And you see here, right here, the character Tao, which I'll explain just very briefly. some characters can be broken down into their component parts, and Tao, we think, is one of them. So if you look at the top portion of the character with the two lines and the line across and the little sort of box underneath, everything but the squiggle line, right? Typically, we think that that means head, right? So the idea is all of your senses, all of your feelings, all of your memories, all of your hopes and dreams, they're all sort of like concentrated right here. It's our main way of perceiving the world. It's our main way of understanding the world. And the character that means the squiggle means foot. So if we think of Tao as always moving and ourselves as trying to follow the right way through life, we have to convey our head, right? We have to be able to move and understand on the go. So this character, Tao, has all these different meanings. Literally, it would mean something like path, or as we often see it, the way, right? That there's a certain way that things take shape, a certain way that things move, a certain path that they follow, and our job, if we pursue wisdom, is to try to find that way. But there's also this idea that we are intricately involved in making that way. We have an impact on the world. So the author that we read, the translation, translates down as way making. And you can think of it as if we are following a path through a forest, let's say. You find the path and it leads you through, yes, but also as you're walking on it, as many people walk on it, they are broadening it, they're flattening it, they're making it easier to follow. So Tao has this sort of dual sense as the way that you follow, but also the way that you lead, the example that you set for others. There are a couple of main themes that I'll discuss. The first is the usefulness of emptiness. So what the Tao Te Ching does oftentimes is it sort of reverses our preference. It wants to show us the other side. It wants to orchestrate what we might call a gestalt shift, if you know that term, where we look at things one way and the Tao Te Ching compels us, let's try to see it the other way, subvert our normal way of understanding. I keep doing my hands like this. It's like turning things upside down. So normally, if we wanted to seek the value of something, we look at what's given. We look at the substance of it. We look at the determinacy of it, which just means the parts of it that are solid, the parts of it that are potentially valuable, the parts of it that we can classify and understand. All of that is determinate. We don't generally look to the emptiness, the indeterminate, the vague, the not given, the hidden. It's almost difficult to talk about how we could even perceive such a thing, right? The Tao Te Ching compels us over and over again, if we try to look for that, the very edges of things, where the things that haven't yet taken shape, right, as they're still sort of inchoate, as they're still sort of chaotic, the things that we can't yet classify, the thing that when you see it, you're like, what is that? Before you could even try to understand what box it fits in. What if we just put our understanding and awareness right there at that we can't quite understand, like everything that's, this experience coming at us, we haven't yet divided it up into things that make sense. This is a theme that we come back to over and over again, right? As we study Daoist religion, it comes up over and over again. So I worded it here as focus on potential, right? And the as yet unformed. If we direct our attention to things just as they're taking shape, we can almost understand things before they really happen, right? That's the idea, that Tao is the unformed. Tao is the potential for things. If we think of it as, time as sort of like linear, and we're here in the present, right? And here's the past and the future right here. If we think of the future as not yet existing, right? The future hasn't yet happened, but in a way it's still there. I mean, we're not headed off a cliff. We're not headed nowhere. We're headed towards something we just don't know what it is yet. That is the characterization of Tao in the Tao Te Ching. So if we try to understand the not yet given, the dark, the not yet come to light, then according to the Tao Te Ching, we'll have a better understanding, really, of what forms the cosmos, what forces shape the seasons. It's all in this as yet undetermined. and emptiness becomes a metaphor of it, right? If you think of if your refrigerator's empty, on one hand, it's kind of sad, right? But on the other hand, you could fill it with anything, right? It is pure potential. We can think of it as empty in a sad way or empty in the best possible way, right? Once the food's in there, it's already going bad, right? Once the food's in there, you have to trouble yourself with deciding. But as long as it's empty, anything could go in there, all matter of delicious things that are fresh, right? So that's the idea. If we direct our attention to the potential, then we'll have a better understanding of the world. We'll have a more authentic understanding of the world, a better understanding. We have these characters that I've put here occurring over and over again. We have Wu, which is translated as absent or indeterminate, which fits the theme of everything that's going on. And we also have Yo, which is given, determinate, present. There's a sense in which Wu is preferable, like in my refrigerator metaphor, because it hasn't yet started to dissipate. It hasn't yet started to fade away. It hasn't yet started to, shrivel up and die, because it hasn't even been born. It hasn't even happened yet. Whereas something that exists is already fading away, right? This day that's halfway through, its ending is already set. Its ending was guaranteed at the moment dawn broke. But Wu never dissipates. It's never about to end because it is pure, not yet having begun. Okay, yes. I have this here. If we think of the world like this empty bucket that has become the centerpiece of this enormously fun time, it is full of potential. It's useless and empty of itself, right? The determinate part is the blueness, right? The given part is just this plastic used to form it. The use of it are all the things you can do with it. What is inside of this bucket when this baby's not in there is what is not yet present, right? It's not yet the baby when it's empty, right? It's just about to be this amazingly fun, this amazingly fun toy. Now imagine that everything, all of the creatures and people, the weather, gods, ancestors, everything, is being connected to this not yet formed, this indeterminate, this inscrutable thing. This thing is Tao. Our understanding that for everything that happens, for everything that is, there's this enormous, vague, indeterminate beginning from which it came. Our willingness to trace what's happening all the way back to this beginning, this Wu, this not yet having become, is how we seek to know Tao itself. I'll also briefly mention desire and satiation. It's mentioned in the Tao Te Ching and also becomes a very prevalent theme in Daoist religion. The idea is that an infinite abundance of desirable alternatives, for me, if I think about it, it's a buffet, right? It's all this delicious looking food. This abundance leads to wanting, leads to craving, which leads to disruption and inevitably turmoil, right? So the idea of having this abundance of different delicious choices only leads us to desire more delicious choices, right? And this disrupts our natural ability to accord with Tao. The passage that we read reads, "The 5 colors blind the eye, the 5 flavors destroy the palate, the 5 notes impair the ear." The idea is that, not that there's just these 5 that are bad, but that, as we will talk about later on, that things are typically grouped in terms of 5. So this represents every single combination that is possible is a combination of these 5, right? So these 5 flavors exhaust all of the different flavors that there could possibly be, right? The 5 colors exhaust all the possible colors that you can see, right? So the flavors, 5 flavors, combined in different ways from all possible flavors, right? The passage ends, knowing when enough is really satisfying, right? So knowing when to stop, knowing when not to let your enthusiasm, your craving for more and more and more become what you seek when you eat, right? Instead of thinking, that each flavor is better than the last, right? Knowing when enough is enough, knowing when to separate your desire for more and more from what your body really needs in order to live its most simple, which is its most authentic, most Tao-like existence. The idea is that, according to the Tao Te Ching, life is quite simple. What we need to survive is quite simple, and there are a few things that have led humans away from the simplicity of their primal existence, right? When everything accorded with Tao before humans separated off and caused turmoil and strife. So this appeal to lessening, well, making your appearance and making your desires more, we could even say, bland, right? If you think about the simplicity of existence, it's not all that exciting, right? It's not all that vivid. Existence is simple and almost tasteless, right? The idea is, it's a metaphor for how if we put these labels on things, if we seek to make things more than what they are, right? If we seek to make things more flavorful, if we seek to make things more colorful, then we're distracting ourselves from the way things really are. We're distracting ourselves from, we'll talk about in the Zhuangzi, the featurelessness of things, right? The Zhuangzi appeals again and again to disappearing into the featureless sky, that if we talk about Tao, we're not separating or bringing anything to the fore. We're not drawing our attention to the most beautiful elements, the tastiest elements, the most, the pleasantly odorous elements. It's everything given at once. And so, while on one hand, it would be, if we think about everything at once, it would be this cacophony, right? All these different sounds mixed together. If we don't seek to pull any of it out, then we don't make a distinction of good and bad. We don't make a distinction between these notes and those notes. It all ends up being given all at once, right? And as humans, we must simply find our way within it. Next, we'll talk about Zhuangzi briefly. We are pretty sure Zhuangzi, Zhuangzhou, was a real person, right? Remember the zi, which is the second character of the Chinese here, and the Zhuangzi means Mr., right? Or man. So the Zhuangzi is sort of, the stories of Mr. Zhuang, right? We do think that Zhuangzi was a real person who wrote at least some of the Zhuangzi, and that he existed, and this text was begun at least around the late 4th and early 3rd century BC. Although the text extended, many chapters were added, definitely not at the same time, so the text became like a compilation of writings based on a few common themes. One is Zhuangzi being sort of we could think of him as today as sort of a lazy sort, right? But he was often sleeping, right? And a lot of what he talks about is the difference between dreaming and waking. We have a few main themes here. One, the scorn of wealth, prestige, and notoriety, which is a theme continued from the Tao Te Ching. Mockery of those who make sense, right? So if we think about this make sense, we generally think of it as rationality, right? Doing things that are nonsensical. But Zhuangzi points our attention to, we're also constructing sense, right? We make it. We think of it today in the language of constructs, right? We say things are a certain way because we made them a certain way. That's the sort of idea. 3 is the acceptance of the inevitability of death and dying, and attempting not to value life over death. If death is inevitable the second you're born, why do we hate it so much? 4, the effortless achievement and cosmic alignment that comes with being fully immersed in Tao. I'm going to discuss just a few of the themes from last week's reading. The first is transformations. If everything is always transforming, who are we to prefer one transformation over the other? There were a couple of stories that talked about transformation. The one that stands out to me is the one with the really old man who's becoming, progressively more disfigured. Right? It describes that the back of his neck comes to be protruding over the top of his head, and he's just shrinking down into almost an unrecognizable shape. And someone asks him if he is upset about it. And he says, no, why would I be upset about it? Tao is transforming, everything's transforming, and I'm transforming along with it. Master Lu says that maybe next he'll transform one of my arms into a rooster, and then I'd never need an alarm clock. Maybe my other arm will be transformed into a crossbow, and I can have roasted owl for dinner. Maybe my hindquarters will be transformed into wheels, and then I'd never have to, harness up a carriage again. This idea that maybe it's better if we don't hang on to how we'd prefer things to be, and in a broader context, hold on to life as if we can resist death. That Tao transforms effortlessly. Tao transforms constantly, and if Tao is transforming us in this way or another, it's better to just see where it takes us. In the Zhuangzi, we get a new interpretation, a different interpretation of Wu, where in the Tao Te Ching, Wu simply meant something like indeterminate, not yet given, not present. Here we have it more of a purposeful, like a goal, right? We have this quote, which of us can be with where there is no being with, be for where there is no being for? Which of us is able to climb the sky and go whirling into the infinite, living forgetful of each other forever and ever? So each of these different sentences here have this character Wu, right? No being with has the character Wu. No being for has the character Wu. The idea is Wu isn't just merely something that isn't given. It's a place we should seek to be, right? It's if Wu is uselessness, we should seek to make ourselves useless so that we can be with Wu, so that we can be with emptiness. So we can be in a place that's not a place, right? We can be for something that isn't given in any way that we could be with it. Which of us is able to climb into the sky? Which of us is actually able to blend in so harmoniously with the way things are? It's as if we've disappeared. What if we could just support ourselves completely with Tao so that we would never need assistance with our transformations, where we would never have to reach outside of ourselves, where we all would be so completely provided for just by the givenness of things that we can begin to forget all of the ways that we help each other, forget all of the rituals and the rites and the habits that we establish to get through life, being completely supported by Tao, completely merging with the vagueness of Tao, the transformations of Tao, would allow us to let go of all of these constructs, let go of all of these concepts that we provide structure to our world with. The third theme is we find in the Zhuangzi one of the first references to sitting and forgetting, which will become a very common meditation technique in later Daoist religion. The idea is if we are able to return to whatever was the very, very beginning, right, before things started to be disrupted, before things became disharmonious, then we need to do this practice of forgetting whatever knowledge it is that makes us feel distinguished, distinguishable, and distinct from other things. The idea is humans have carved out this place within Tao and made it into something different. And we need to forget how we did that in the first place. We need to forget the reasons that we divided things up into beautiful things and ugly things, into people that are able and people that are inept. All these different distinctions and divisions that we've made are not the way Tao really is. Tao includes everything in this, enormous mass, but humans have sought to make certain things valuable and certain things not valuable. And these are the sorts of things that we need to forget. We have this story of Confucius and his disciple sitting together. Yan Hui is Confucius's favorite disciple, by the way. And so Yan Hui is trying to make progress, trying to get closer to Tao. And he eventually is able to sit and forget everything. And this is connected to the way the chapter began. In the beginning of this chapter, there is described people who could climb to great heights without being afraid of falling, jump in the water without getting wet, enter fire without burning. The idea is they forget, not that they don't forget that humans can't be burned by fire, clearly, but they forget the idea that we're holding on to life so much that we seek to avoid things that would kill us, but in a way that we almost avoid what living ends up being, right? This idea that we can accomplish more if we forget the dangers. Now I'll talk a little bit more about this fish that you've been looking at. The idea, it's towards the end of the chapter that we assigned. And it describes that when the water dries up, all of the fish have this biological mechanism where they spit foam on each other. They actually, as they're gasping for air, they spit water and foam on it, and it ends up prolonging their lives. And we could think of it as, an instance of compassion, right? So the fish probably know that they're going to die. I mean, we could think that they know that they're going to die, and their response is to valiantly try to save each other. But the Zhuangzi points out that this is great and all, but it would be better if they didn't even know that the others existed. It would be better if they could just forget about one another in the vast lakes, right? If they could just be fully supported by Tao, they wouldn't need to support one another in this way. It's only when things are disrupted that these fish help each other. It's only when the water that they need to survive is drying up that this happens. And this is a metaphor in the Zhuangzi for only when the world is disrupted do you need, well, frankly, Confucians, but do you need ethics? Do you need morals? Do you need prescriptions to tell people what to do? In a harmonious world, people would already know. People would feel what is the appropriate thing to do without having to be told. If everything is harmonious, we don't need to help one another. We don't need to, go out of our way to be compassionate. If everything is supported by Tao with exactly what it needs, then we could, in this way, forget about each other. So I hope you're getting the sense that it's not literally forget. It's not literally forget that fire can't burn you, right? It's not literally forget about each other, but forget all these tethers and ties and concepts and explanations that sort of hold our tenuous grasp, our tenuous understanding. Tenuous is our fragile understanding of the world together. If we begin to loose these bonds, these, this net that we've gathered everything up with, what would result isn't just knowing nothing. What would result is being more openness to the content of our experience. Because all these ways of understanding the world, all these things that we're trying to remember as opposed to forget, may actually be keeping us from experiencing Tao in its primal, most authentic form.